Hi, I'm Andy Ellis. I'm the host of this show and a potential Green Party candidate for governor of Maryland in 2026. I'm using this show to highlight interesting people and ideas that help me and you to understand what is happening and what is possible. You can learn more about the campaign by going to GoGreen2026.com. Guests on this show do not necessarily support my campaign or the Green Party. They've agreed to come on to discuss ideas and issues. And of course, click the subscribe button on YouTube so you can keep up to date with this podcast. Good evening. It is November 4th, 2025. Today is Election Day for this year. And a year from today, it will be the day after Election Day and after our Election Day. And I hope after we rest a little bit that day, we will be celebrating a job well done, a great and successful campaign, and we'll feel really like we did the work that we need to do. This is also the first show of what we will call season 3 of this podcast, and a lot has happened since we talked earlier this year. So much so that I probably have to change the intro musical around a little bit because I'm no longer considering running We Are Filed and Official. But let's go over some of the things that have happened in the last year since we last did this podcast. We launched our petition to be included in the Maryland Public Television debates next fall. We traveled all over the state this spring and summer spreading the word about our campaign. Our newsletter, Theory of Change, which is our space for outside-of-the-box political communication, launched this summer. And we added our guest tonight, Owen Silverman Andrews, as the lieutenant governor candidate, making the ticket full. Owen and I also filed for office one day in Annapolis in September, and most recently, we officially declared our intent to qualify for Maryland's Public Finance and Matching Funds program. It is a lot. A lot has happened, but now that we're within a year of Election Day, it's only going to get busier, and we're going to dive into a lot of that tonight. But before we do, I want to let you know that in addition to this podcast, we're also going to be launching a live stream that is focused on Maryland, politics, organizing, and our campaign. So make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel so you can be part of the live streaming community. And with that, I want to bring in our guest tonight, my longtime friend and the lieutenant governor candidate on our ticket, Owen Silverman Andrews. Owen, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, Andy. Thanks for having me on.
I am so excited about this. We got to change around a little bit of the stuff in that intro. We got to get this podcast up and going again. But it's one of the things I love about the campaign, and I can't wait to kick off season 3 here with you. As our guest and maybe a guest host, co-host. We'll figure all that out as we go forward.
Right on. Let's do it.
Let's do it. So let's start with a question. The way this is going to work tonight, folks, is I'm going to ask Owen a couple of questions, and then Owen's going to ask me a couple of questions. You'll get the vibe of how we're working together and all of that. But we're really going to just be telling a story of what our campaign is all about. So, Owen, what made you decide to join this ticket?
Yeah, it's a big question, but I think it breaks down into 3 parts. The first part was like gathering sense of dread about the doom cycle of our 2-party system. It felt like we were seeing the same thing play out again, but worse, both at the national level and at the state and local level. And it felt like that if we don't build up alternatives to the 2 corporate parties that have built this system to benefit themselves and a very few wealthy elite, that we would be destined for more of the same. So that was sort of using a negative feeling for a positive motivational. I think a lot of folks are feeling that sense of dread, that sense of anxiety, and that creates a lot of pressure to fall into line. But I think folks can also break out and do something outside the box, do something more revolutionary or push for more structural change. So that was the first thing. The second thing, sort of the other side of that coin, is an optimism based on experience that organizing works. So on the one hand, I was feeling this sense of dread, things are getting worse. On the other hand, real confidence that when we organize, when we take collective action, when we build strategies that are realistic but also ambitious, that we can change the dynamics in our communities for the better. And then the third reason that really prompted me to want to run, besides partnering up with you, Andy, was dynamics specific to this electoral cycle and this campaign in particular. And so when I started researching more the incumbents and seeing how big money was deriving some of their decision making, and how there wasn't really an accountability structure built in, given the century-long control of the legislative branch, which is supposed to be a check on the executive branch by the Democratic Party, given the state of the news media, a lot of great journalists doing the best they can with limited resources, or more corporate-minded bosses, sort of prompted me to say, okay, well, if we're not pushing out stories based on real research on donations and how that's driving the attitudes of the more Miller administration, as well as some of the other candidates who will be in this race, then who will. So those are really the three reasons. Pessimism, optimism. So coming together as optimism, and then specific factors of this race.
Excellent. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And I don't know if anybody noticed, but my friend Mr. Wendell joined the conversation here, and I appreciate you staying focused as you start to see the cattail pop up there. It's a feature, not a bug, of this podcast that occasionally a cat will join. So, I'm glad that we kicked it off well that way. What are you most excited about in this campaign? I think you touched on some of it in the reasons that you ran, but beyond that, what are you most looking forward to?
Yeah, I'm looking forward to redefining what winning is. I think for the first 7 or so years that I was a Green, right up until fairly recently, I thought of our work as losing in an impactful way, right? And losing in a way that changed the conversation for the better, in which people developed capacity and training and built networks that could be useful for other organizing. But still kind of thought of it within the paradigm of how well can we lose, and occasionally break through and you win, a seat on a housing board, or a big community association, or a city council race. But I thought of it in those terms. And more recently, and this was really helpful with the Talbot Spy article that came out, it talked about us redefining what winning means, and going back to that two-party death spiral that we're in. Winning is defined in a two-party system as defeating as mercilessly as you can the other side temporarily, right? The pendulum always swings back. That's why it's a two-party system and not a one-party system, except in the Maryland General Assembly. But I think in a multi-party system, winning means something different. And if our work is to create, or begin to create, or set the foundation for a multi-party system, then we're redefining what winning looks like. There's new room for collaboration. There's new room for accountability. And we've set specific goals that we'll get into a little bit later. And if we meet those goals, or exceed those goals even, then we've won. And I think running to win in a redefined winning sense, that's really exciting for me.
I love the idea of redefining winning instead of redefining losing. I think that for a long time, I was there with you. I was like, we need to redefine losing. And people were like, boy, that sure does sound exciting. I can't imagine what I'd rather be doing than spend all my time redefining losing, right? But I think that pivot to redefining winning speaks a whole lot differently about how we approach this. And I think that's a great way to frame it, and I'm excited about that too. I guess we'll flip this around in a second, and I'll talk about what that stuff means to me. But anything else you want to say before you put on the interviewer's hat and we switch roles here a little bit?
Yeah, well, just to give a shout out to Mr. Wendell, since he made it an appearance, and how it's not a bug but a feature of this campaign. I'm also looking forward to defining what, in the green sense, we call it ecological wisdom, right? But how that relates to other animals besides humans, and the liberation of animals and animals' rights and the rights of nature. So I think it's only right that if Mr. Wendell wants to come on the show, that he can, and we invite other mammals or other animals to come on the show too.
Yeah, we have no closed doors in this house. No cat will allow a door to stay closed for very long. And so in the past, I tried to keep the cats away from the show. They'd be scrapping at the door and all. This year, I just decided if they want to come in, they want to come in. And I like that new sort of we're welcome to everybody ethos that you laid out there. So
Open door policy.
right, exactly. So, all right, so let's flip it around. Like I said, the way we're doing this show tonight's a little bit different. We're playing around with Owen having a hosting hat as well. He was a guest on last year's on the podcast in 2024. We had a great show, but now that he's part of the ticket, you're going to be seeing a lot more of Owen here. And he's not always going to be answering questions. Sometimes he's going to be on here as the host instead of as the guest. So with that introduction, let me turn it over to you and see what questions you've got.
Yeah, I really had to step up my game for this potential co-host. Not only am I interviewing to be the 11th and final lieutenant governor of Maryland, right, but I'm also interviewing to be a co-host of this podcast. So, I got my headphones, I've got my mic here. My wife's a singer, so she was able to hook it up. So hopefully a little better than last time when I was kind of always looking above the camera. We learn as we go. We're building the plane as we fly it, whatever metaphor you want to use. So yeah, let's flip it around. I'll be asking you some questions, Andy, and kind of before we get into 4 or 5 of the goals of the campaign, kind of wanted to share with folks a little anecdote and ask you about it, Andy. When we were in Annapolis a few weeks ago, it seems like a long time ago, but we were in Annapolis on September 22nd. We were at the State Board of Elections. We were filing, filling out paperwork, making sure we put our names in the right places. And we had a couple of journalists from 2 major outlets there. And, you were chatting it up with the SBE staff, and that was all, fine and good. And then there was this moment at the end after we had, filed our paperwork and we were doing a few photos and last questions with the journalist and the photographer from one of the outlets. And your dad was there, and he was serving as he's a I won't say amateur photographer. He's a photographer, and he was taking pictures. And at one point, one of the journalists, I think had heard us say that he was your dad and wanted to ask him a question, maybe really emphasizing that human interest story. And for folks who don't know, who haven't seen the episode when Steve was on the show, Steve used to work on the Hill and is sort of a pro in this area. And so he didn't take it wasn't a trick question or anything. It was just, did you always know Andy was going to run for high office or something like that? And he just said, yes. And then there was nothing else, right? And it was the perfect answer because it gave them nothing to distract from what we were saying and what the message was. But since now we're on your home turf on the podcast, let's pull that answer out beyond one word. And I want to ask you, Andy, were there moments kind of growing up in a political household where that's looking back seem like turning points towards the path that you're on now?
Yeah, so I mean, I grew up my dad was a Republican. He was a PR guy. He helped out on a lot of campaigns. He worked on the Hill. And I grew up in one of those like households where dad was a Republican and mom was a Democrat. I don't know if those still exist anymore, but we had, we watched like McNeil Lehrer NewsHour at dinner time and things like that. And so political debate was always something that was happening in our household. And I don't know, my dad and my mom may have known I was going to run for office before I ever did. But I think, from as long as I can remember, political debate and political discussion was part of our dinner table conversation, part of what we talked about in the car. It was what we watched on television. And that defined a lot of my sort of early years. And I watched CNN religiously at election time. I watched election coverage. It's like some kids are like, can I stay up late to watch X, Y, and Z? I was like, can I stay up late to watch the primary results and, whatever in a presidential race? And then I would say the other thing that was really impactful for me was joining the debate team. My mom was a national caliber debater back in the day when she was in high school. And so debate and politics were always part of the conversation for me. And so when I was in high school, I joined the debate team. When we moved to Frederick, I joined the debate team at Governor Thomas Johnson High School. And I was really active in it for 4 years. For folks that don't know, the kind of debate that I did, policy debate, is really focused on policy solutions and oftentimes also focused on values-based critiques of policy solutions. So I was a good debater. I did that for 4 years. I did it in high school. I did it in college. I coached college debate for about a decade after I got out of high school, including coming back to Towson in 2005 and coaching, and then eventually coaching the 2008 national champion team at Towson. And so for me, I think it was growing up in a political house and being involved in debate that led me to the path of running for office and running for office as a Green outside of the two-party system, speaking truth to power, challenging the establishment, and trying to offer people a vision of something different than what we have right now. And I think that I don't know that I always thought that I would run. I think when my dad answered that question that way, I was like, oh, he always knew. But it took a while for it to click for me. So yeah, I think it's not surprising looking back on it. I didn't always know that was the path it was going to be, but now it all makes sense.
Yeah, thanks for sharing all that. So we'll talk more later. You mentioned debate. We'll talk more later about that. But let's put something kind of up front in the conversation here that sometimes gets treated a little bit like a boogeyman in politics for good reason, and that's money and how we fund our campaigns. And so last night we had an event here in Northeast Baltimore at Maggie's Farm restaurant, and it was the topic of the event was public campaign finance. And speaking of dads, my father-in-law was there, and we were talking about all this wonkery, and he was like, "Woo, go public finance," and kind of making fun of us for being dorks. But let's chop it up. Let's get into it, and let's talk about why funding our campaign in a different way than politics as usual is a top line goal for this campaign. So first, what is the status quo? How do candidates in Maryland fund their campaigns? And then how are we approaching financing our campaign differently?
So you can't talk about the problems with the two-party system and with politics as usual without talking about the influence of money in politics. So Citizens United passed in 2012 or something like that, and it created the opportunity for a whole bunch of corporate money to go into politics and to help reshape the political landscape, not just at the national level, but particularly at the state level. And I think one of the things that happened during the 2010s and the 2020s is as the federal government doom loop and polarization and partisanship was getting worse and worse, people realized that they couldn't enact their big policy agendas at the federal level. So they shifted all of this money and energy to the state level and started pouring all of this money into state level campaigns that really changed the way that state politics work in a place like Maryland or really anywhere. And what that looks like in Maryland is there's a $6,000 cap on the amount of money that anybody can take from a person. LLCs can donate to campaigns, PACs can donate to campaigns, and there's a whole bunch of entities that can donate to campaigns. So we have this thing where there's a whole bunch of money, oftentimes from outside of the state, oftentimes from donors who are looking to purchase the outcomes that they want, who have reshaped our politics in order to serve donors, national political parties, and national interests. So that's sort of the status quo. And we all know it. We all know that when we don't have to look at the political science to understand that money in politics dominates the decisions that get made. Corporations and the elite get to set the agenda, and they get to determine what gets passed. And they do that by making money the coin of the realm, as it were. Now, I think that if you do look at the political sciences, some really interesting study that says popular opinion almost never shapes the outcomes of federal or state legislative decisions. Elites and money almost always are the ones that are shaping the outcomes. And when they do happen to align, like when the outcomes happen to align with popular interest, it's because there's elite money behind those types of things. And so that is the way that politics works right now. Given the way that is how politics works right now, and both parties have taken a stance against unilateral disarmament, by which they mean we know the system is bad, but we're going to keep doing it. We end up in this space where there is no way out of the money in politics situation. Like, nobody's going to repeal Citizens United. Congress is not going to pass campaign finance reform in a significant way. So we've got to get creative on how we address that. And that's where I think public finance comes in as the antidote to this type of politics. Mamdani used public finance in the New York primary and in the New York general, and it was a big part of helping him get the money that he needed to fuel the campaign that he had. But generally, and there's a lot of places that have some public finance. Zach Blanchard used public finance in Baltimore City last year to win a council seat against the most entrenched, dare I say, most influenceable by money. I don't want to get sued by using some other words, but most influenceable by money councilperson Eric Costello, who was an entrenched incumbent who had a lot of those $6,000 donations. Zach Blanchard, who was a teacher and a football coach, was able to run a really grassroots campaign using Baltimore City's public financing program in order to challenge that, and in order to beat an entrenched incumbent and show people that the power of entrenched incumbency and that money doesn't necessarily mean you're going to win.
Yeah. Yeah, I think sometimes in advocacy circles and in theoretical conversations, we talk about kind of superficial reforms or reformist reforms. And this isn't, from what I can tell, one of those, right? This really does get to the root of the problem and creates an alternative. It doesn't get big money out of politics, right? It does not.
And that's not its goal. Its goal is not to get big money out of politics, because as long as Citizens United is the way that it is, that's not going to happen. But what it does do is it allows campaigns like ours or Zach's or other folks to have the resources they need to be able to compete in order to get their message out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit more about the situation in Maryland in a statewide race. How long has this been around in Maryland, and has anyone ever used it? You mentioned some city council races, some examples from other states at the municipal level. We're talking statewide. We're talking the highest office in state government in a mid-sized state. What's the precedent here that we're operating in relation to some degree?
Yeah, so in the 1970s, after Watergate, Maryland and New Jersey and some other states adopted some form of public financing for certain offices. So some form of public financing at the gubernatorial level has existed in Maryland since the 1970s. I think Ellen Sowerberry used it for a governor's race back in the day. Larry Hogan used it in 2014. But those were different kinds of programs than we have right now. Those were like about how you spend money, not how you raise money. So the new program went into place in 2021, and I think the first election that it was used in was 2022. And Rashern Baker and Nancy Navarro used that in the Democratic primary in 2022. They're the only ones who have used it in the new version of the program that went in place in 2022. And now we're the second ones who have used it at that level. We are the first small party campaign to do it and the first campaign to try to do it for the general election. So how it works is that it sets up a system where you have to opt into the program. So you and I have opted into the program at this point. And once you opt into the program, you can only take donations from individuals, and those donations are capped at $250 per person. So nobody can give $6,000. People can give people in state and out of state can give $250 per person. For people who are in state, we have to get 1,500 of those donors, and they have to at least 1,500 in-state donors, and they have to give a total of $120,000. We need that by about the end of July of 2026. And if we do get that, we qualify for matching funds that come from the state. So the first $50 are matched at $8, which means that a $50 donation is matched at $400. So if we qualify, some of those $50 donations we got last night will be worth $400 for our campaign. And then there's like some complex math. I think the second $50 counts at $6 for matching. The third $50 counts at $2 for matching. You can go to the website GoGreen2026.com, donate, and learn more about this and figure out the exact math if you want to nerd out on it. But the basic premise is that if we agree to cap our donors at a high, at $250 per person, only take donations from individuals, and be very transparent about how we earn and spend our money, we are eligible, if we get 1,500 Maryland donors and $120,000, to get matching funds for the general election for the state. You and I have done some calculations on it, and it turns out to be between $500,000, $600,000, $700,000, $800,000 that we could get based on what the combination of donations we get to make up that $120,000. And that is transformative. We were talking at the beginning about how these kind of funds allow campaigns to have the kind of reach that they would never have otherwise. And you and I can do a whole lot if we have $800,000 in August of 2026. We can tell a lot more people that the two-party system isn't working for them and that we have an alternative and that they have a voice and a vote in empowering that alternative.
Yeah. Thanks for breaking all that down, Andy. And just, if folks are listening or watching at home, I know when we were talking about this last night, we had a really dynamic speaker who, eats, lives, and breathes this stuff. And people were right along nodding with her and said, you should make a YouTube video about this. And then, Andy and I kind of gave our takes on it. And I saw some eyes glaze over a little bit. It's complex stuff, right? And as I was doing some research on it, you mentioned that in the Democratic primary last gubernatorial cycle, Baker, former county executive, Prince George's, and Navarro, former county councilwoman in Montgomery, they used it. But then I think they ran out of money and they tried to withdraw, and didn't, like, the State Board of Elections say, if you withdraw, you got to pay us back, right? Like, wasn't there, so it's even very established politicians with lots of fancy advisors and legal teams and who've already qualified and can afford the best advice. It's complicated. So I just want to say on one level, yes, these are the rules as they've been set out. And on another level, this is somewhat new terrain, especially as it relates to the general election, especially as it relates to a third party campaign trying to qualify. So it's a little bit of a tightrope that we're walking here, both in terms of trying to follow the rules as they exist now and being fully aware that in green campaigns in past election cycles, 2006, Kevin Zeese's Senate race, for example, the rules of the game are changed by the Annapolis bosses in the legislature based on what benefits them in the middle of the game, right? So we have to be clear-eyed we need to be even more accurate and more precise in coloring inside the lines, and also be aware that there are challenges as well as opportunities that could arise down the road.
Yeah, totally. And, in the 2024 presidential campaign, Jill Stein and Butch Ware, or Jill Stein in the primary process, qualified for federal matching funds that they had based a lot of their strategy on. And the Biden administration slow-rolled the release of those funds in a pretty significant way, almost to the point that the campaign wasn't able to use them. So, because this is complicated and not that many people know about it, we should expect potential opposition to use these levers of power in order to stop us from getting $600,000 or $700,000, right? Like, it's all fun and games until you got to write the Green Party a $700,000 check. Then you start to regret those decisions about investing in public financing, especially if the election is close, right? Like, if we're in a close election and we have the ability to go on TV and do mailers and do all that stuff that the big money pays for the other campaigns, or that the PACs pay for the other campaigns, and call it individual expenditures, suddenly the game changes. They are relying on us packing stuff in our car and huffing all over the state and, printing our own stuff on our printer. They have some sort of quaint idea of how we're supposed to run these races that is not anything that they afford themselves whatsoever. And they're not going to be excited if during like the World Series next year, we got an Ellis Andrews ad running talking about how we love baseball and it's time for a change, but that's what we're working for here, because we think that as you said, this is not this doesn't have to be a reformist reform. This has the opportunity to be a transformative, realigning reform that gives parties like ours the resources that we need in order to run the kind of campaigns that we need. And beyond that, 6 counties in Maryland have this for local level races. And while we are building the list of those 1,500 people that can donate to ours, that list becomes an organizing asset that we can use after that we can help people running in Prince George's, Anne Arundel, Howard, Montgomery, Baltimore County, and Baltimore City, who all want to run on public financing, so that Greens can consistently be using these public financing programs in order to have the kind of resources that we need to compete with the big parties and their big money.
Yeah, right on. Yeah, it's really, really exciting stuff. So one of the values of the Green Party, it's kind of a sleeper value, we don't talk about it enough, I think, is future focus, right? And so let's look into the future a little bit. We don't have a crystal ball, but let's think about, it is now the end of the race. It's August. We've qualified, right? We have 1,500 Maryland residents, permanent residents or citizens, who have donated to the campaign. We've raised $120,000, and of course we want to go well above those goals, so that there's no room for discreditation. Yes, we'll take a preemptory bow here. So it's August. We've qualified. What now? I mean, you mentioned advertising. Obviously, that's part of it. But what else do we want to do with this money? Which, by the way, if I understand correctly, is not from taxpayers, but is actually based on fees and fines of other politicians who have gone awry, right?
I believe that's the case. I believe that it is based mostly on fees and fines of filing fees, of people who took money from a PAC they weren't supposed to, from people who didn't report things. I think that's where most of the money comes from. There may be some funding from the General Assembly in there, but I think it's mostly those fines and those fees. So once we get that, if we get that, and it is August and we get that check, I think we need to have a team strategic discussion about what that looks like. But I think we get to hire people to knock on doors and lead canvas teams across the state, something no third party campaigns have had before us. I think we can send out mail to targeted groups of voters, independents, and young people, and folks who we think might be likely to support the Green Party in this election. And I also think that we can organize and engage with the core Greens across the state. There's 5,000 Greens across the state. And if we could get every one of those folks to vote, then not every one of them is going to vote, but if we can get turnout amongst those folks up, if we can get excitement amongst those folks up, the political science on this says that when a third party has an activated base, like I think that we can do this year, that third party performs above expectations, performs above polling, and surprises people on election day. So when we get that money, I think we're going to have whether we get that money or not, I think we're going to have a multi-pronged strategy that involves people in communities talking to other people at doors, at fairs, at festivals. It's also going to include some television advertising. Some of this digital advertising on these streaming services is way cheaper than it ever used to be. And I think we can do a lot of that. It's going to involve targeted mailings, it's going to involve digital ads, and it's going to involve putting a lot of people to work. I think it's really important to point out that the reason we raise money is not so that we can host lavish parties, it's so that we can put our friends and comrades to work at a time when the economy is really bad and there's not a lot of opportunity for a lot of people. There's a lot of people who've been laid off from jobs that are never coming back. And if we can put them to work on our campaigns, spreading the word about democracy and the potential for multi-party governments and grassroots democracy in the state of Maryland, I think we make a real significant push to get the kind of capacity in the party we need in order to win Baltimore City elections down the road, to win Prince George's County elections down the road, to push for ballot initiatives down the road. None of this is the end. All of it is a work in progress where we build an infrastructure and we construct a new world in which it is possible to get different outcomes than the ones that we have right now.
Yeah, I'm excited about all that, but I think especially hiring folks, right, who have been, a lot of them either do this work for free or for less than they probably are should be earning for alternative or radical political organizing, or they make compromises with their values and work for campaigns that can afford to pay what they're worth, right? And so the opportunity of having over $500,000 to be able to hire people who are talented, who have experience, and who know how to run field operations, for example, and have them be part of the core team for the past 100 days. Have folks who are going out door knocking, being able to compensate them fairly if they're looking for compensation. That's really exciting, and that I think also is a game changer, because when the only games in town that can afford to pay for the most part are Republicans or Democrats, that creates a center of gravity that pulls people in, because people got to eat, right? People want to be compensated for their labor, and this is why this is a game changer, because people whose values are aligned with us, but are living within our current stage of capitalism and need to pay the bills, can now get paid working for a campaign that aligns with their values.
Yeah, totally. And, I wrote a newsletter, a series of newsletter articles about this summer. Dr. Bernard Tomas, who wrote a book, he's a Rhodes Scholar, big academic, who wrote a book called The Demise and Rebirth of American Third Parties. He talks about this resource issue that we talked about a little bit earlier. And it is not just the resources to get into the media. It is the resources to hire the qualified people who are value aligned with us and to bring them in and to build that capacity within the party. Too often, green campaigns that have a hard time raising money look badly on raising money and hiring people because they say like politics is a grift or something like that. And I understand that perspective, but as long as we operate in that perspective, we're going to continue to lose young and talented people who come into the party and want and have an opportunity to help us build it and grow it, but get sucked out of it because capitalism being what it is, people have to eat, people have to survive. So we are trying to break that cycle and break down that wall that stops us from being able to have the resources to employ the people who become the future candidates, who help us build the bench, who help us do the local organizing and things like that. If we can consistently use this public financing money in order to hire people and to create an ecosystem of organizers, we can really move toward that multi-party vision and not be stuck in this world where we hope everybody will volunteer or take our meal at the vegan fast food place as compensation for the hours and hours of labor they're doing, while Democrats and Republicans are offering them living wages in order to run their campaigns.
Yeah. No, it would be huge. So let's move a little bit further into the future. We talked about kind of what the last 3 months of the campaign would look like if we qualify. We're about to talk about some other goals that we set. Some of them are related to money, some of them are not. But what does 2027 and beyond look like for the Maryland Green Party, or for Green parties and radical movements, radical political electoral formations around the country that are looking at our campaign? What does the future look like if we are able to hit this first goal of qualifying for campaign finance that we're discussing, and then use that and the other resources and strategies we have to hit some of the other goals that we're about to talk about? What's the future look like beyond this campaign?
Yeah, so our friend and my mentor and a Green who passed too early, Kevin Zeese, in 2020 described the 2020s as a decade of transformation. And he said that what we have coming before us is a decade of transformation where the way that things look going into the 2020s is going to be different at the end of the 2020s. I frankly think that the COVID pandemic and the Biden presidency stalled the progressive ability to move that transformation in a positive direction. But I think our campaign and a bunch of other campaigns that are happening in 2025 and 2026 have the opportunity to help us bring it back toward a progressive world where we are fighting for more justice, more peace, more democracy, and a more ecological worldview. Look, the transformation is occurring. The people, the rich are getting richer. The poor are getting told that they can beg for food stamps, and the jobs are going away. The education system that we've had in the past is going away. And if we don't have a vision of what a new world looks like, we are going to be transformed, not doing the transforming. And I think that path is a very, very dark one. The one that the two-party system is on right now is a very dark path toward more polarization, more economic inequality, more death, more suffering, and more war around the world. Plus, the climate crisis and the ecological crisis is going to heighten all those things. So I think the opportunity that we provide to people is to see what a future that is a multi-party future starts to look like, to see what alternatives are being excluded from the political discussion right now, and to see what it takes to build the kind of political institutions we may never get to benefit from, but the people who come after us will be able to use in order to build something that is more people-based, more human-based, and help us survive the multiple crises that the world is facing right now. So I don't mean to say that we are the linchpin to the survival of the world, but we are absolutely part of a long struggle of people who did, as Dr. King said, straighten their back and work for freedom, because that is what we need to do right now. We need to get ourselves free from this two-party system that is ruled by the corporations and the elite and build something better that we can use, that generations after us can use, in order to transform the world to be more just, more peaceful, more democratic, and to survive the ecological crisis we face. That's what Kevin was talking about when he said this is a decade of transformation, and that is what we need to lean into and help build, so that once we're done with this, other people feel like this is a baton that they can pick up, take forward, and make the changes that we need in order to survive.
Right on, right on. So let's do it. 1,500 Maryland donors, $120,000 by the summer. Let's surpass that goal, and let's see what's possible in a politics where folks who are making a modest living can contribute $150 and see that multiplied many times. Contribute $50 or $5 and $10 and have a real stake and be able to hold us as candidates to account, right? I mean, it's not just give us money so that we can run a great campaign. It's you will have a stake, an outsized stake, a stake that you're not able to have in any other gubernatorial campaign, likely in the general election, because they're all busy as one of the speakers at the event last night said, they're in a windowless room dialing for $6,000 checks and the compromises that come along with it. And they really don't care about your $5 or $10 or $15, despite what all the endless text messages and emails you get say. That's about list building for data extraction as much as it is about the $5 or $10 that they're asking for. Absolutely. So let's do it. So let's move on to one of our next goals. I know this one is near and dear to your heart. You started off talking about being a high school debater and a college debater, and we know you also were a university debate coach. So why is debate important? Why are candidate debates important in general? Before we get into why is it important for our campaign and all that, what's the benefit to democracy of candidates debating each other on a stage?
So the first thing is that debates are really clarifying for voters. Most voters who only get to consume advertisements or a little bit of what they read in the newspaper or something like that seldom get to see candidates standing next to each other on a stage, sharing ideas, sharing values, sharing solutions. Now, there's a whole lot wrong with the way that we do political debates, but fundamentally, political debates are one of the points where most people are focused on the same political question at the same time in a way that allows them to have clarity about what their candidates believe on things. Most people are busy. The average voter, the high information voter, is reading all sorts of blogs and reading all sorts of newspapers and following podcasts like this. And for the high information voter, the debate oftentimes feels like it is not getting into enough detail and it's not parsing the question finely enough. But your average working person who's got kids and school events and has jobs and family obligations and youth sports or whatever they have is not paying attention to all of that stuff. And the debate may be the one opportunity they have to see the two candidates offering their ideas next to each other. So that is the value of debates. They're good. They clarify things. They put candidates in front of each other. And even if they don't get the viewership that they once got in the golden age of television, they still get a lot of viewership for political programming, often in the middle of the week in the fall, right? So they're really good about that. Now, one of the things that has happened through history is that candidates have been third-party candidates, small party candidates, independent candidates have been included in debates. And when they're included in debates, people are like, I like the ideas that they have. When Ross Perot was in the debates in 1992, was that the year? In 1992, Ross Perot was in the debates, and people were like, we like this guy. And the mainstream media and the two parties were like, why do you like this guy? He is a weird, boring billionaire with charts and nonsensical solutions. People liked that. People liked that. They thought he was speaking truth to power. They thought that he was criticizing both parties. They liked the solutions that he had to offer, and they liked the perspective outside of that which the mainstream media and the two parties wanted you to hear. He did well in those debates, and very quickly, the two parties at the national level decided that that was never going to happen again, and they were never going to risk that kind of thing. So they consolidated who was able to be in the debates. They got the League of Women Voters out of it, and they created their own corporation that was there to just make sure the two of them were able to do it. In Maryland, Maryland Public Television and other organizations still allowed Greens to debate as late as 2006, when Kevin Zeese, who we have mentioned before, was running for United States Senate as a Green Party candidate in the middle of the Iraq War on an anti-war platform. He got up there, he had the debate, I think that the Washington Post basically said he won that debate. Well, after that, there was no more including third-party folks in debates in Maryland. And right now, Maryland Public Television, who is a taxpayer-funded entity, has 30% of their funding from taxpayers, hosts the debate every year. In 2022, the Libertarians, the Greens, and the Working Class Party challenged that debate because it excluded all of them. It excludes them because Maryland Public Television's editorial standards say that a third-party candidate has to be polling 10% in order to be able to be on the stage for the gubernatorial election. Now, the interesting thing about this is the best third-party or independent performance since Reconstruction in Maryland was 9% by Hyman Pressman in 1966, I think.
68, maybe?
68, but the important part here is that Hyman Pressman was the sitting comptroller of the city of Baltimore. He was a real interesting guy. He was elected as a Republican, became a Democrat, but he had bipartisan support. He had name recognition, and he still only got 9%, which means that his finish would not have allowed him to qualify for a Maryland Public Television debate. So this is their standard. They get to set their own editorial standard because the Supreme Court has ruled the public television stations, even if they get public funding, are still television stations. They still have independent broadcast licenses with the FCC. So you will see all of these public television stations setting standards like Maryland's does that ensures that only Democrats and Republicans are on that stage.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Okay, so we've kind of set the context, both historical, recent, contemporary history, Maryland, recent politics of the 21st century. We understand now why third-party and independent candidates have been excluded, especially over the last 15, 20 years, not for hundreds of years in this supposedly structural two-party system, but, in this increasingly constrictive two-party system in the 21st century. What would we be able to do if, say, we get ourselves invited to the debates, or they invite us out of the goodness of their hearts? What contrast would we be able to draw? Why is this a top line goal for our campaign?
Yeah. So I think that when there are two voices on the stage, every issue that gets discussed from the perspective of those two voices. So let's take, for example, the reparations bill that Wes Moore vetoed last year. Both houses of the General Assembly passed a reparations bill that would have created a commission to study reparations for enslavement and for all of the time from Reconstruction through Jim Crow in Maryland. It had the support of the Black Caucus, the largest Black caucus in the country. It passed both the House and the Senate entirely on party lines. It went to Governor Moore's desk. He waited for a while, and then he vetoed it in May. Now, that question is going to come up in a debate. And if that debate is between Wes Moore and a Republican, the Republican is going to say reparations are bad, the budget is busted, we don't owe a debt. They're going to make a whole bunch of Republican talking point arguments. Wes Moore is going to get up and say, you're wrong about that, but my way is the best way of giving reparations. I vetoed it because we don't need another study. We don't need another commission. If those are the only two voices in that debate, Wes Moore is going to sound pretty reasonable, even to people who like reparations. But if there's a third voice in that debate that is saying, actually, we are in a party that has supported reparations for 20 years. We believe that Maryland has to have a reparations policy. And we think both the Republicans are wrong and the Democrats are wrong, even if for different reasons. That entirely changes the context of what people who are watching that debate get to hear and the perspectives they get to hear. And you can play that out on all sorts of issues. You can play that out on energy policy. On energy policy, the Republicans say the corporate utilities are good, fossil fuels are good, and renewables are bad. The Democrats say we need an all of the above approach to energy, where the corporations are good, the fossil fuels are good, and the renewables are good. We need a third perspective up there that says Maryland needs to transition as quickly as possible away from fossil fuels and the companies and industries that support them toward publicly owned power, democratically controlled power grid, and democratically controlled power policy, and as aggressive of a renewal policy as we can. Those having that third voice or that fourth voice or that fifth voice on the stage changes the dimensions of the debate. And when you change the dimensions of the debate, you get different answers, different solutions, and different values. And I believe that when Marylanders see us up there offering those perspectives that say both Democrats and Republicans are wrong for different reasons, and we have values and solutions that run counter to them, they will say, we want to vote for these people, which is why we are not invited to the debates. So I think having those different perspectives up there changes the nature of the debate. I also think another important thing it does is it speaks to people who don't feel spoken to by the two parties who are on the stage right now. One thing that having active and strong third-party campaigns and candidates does is it increases voter turnout because more people see their ideas and values represented on the debate stage. They go out and vote. And all of us who are in politics should want more people to vote. And so, having more voices in the debate increases turnout in a real and significant and measurable way, because people will say, I wasn't going to vote for, the guy who wants to be president from the blue party or the guy who wants to be president from the red party, but we like this guy. Andy's up here. He's explaining things I believe in terms that I like, and I'm going to vote instead of not voting. That's a win. We should celebrate it. Our policy should be geared toward getting as many people the information as they can and having as many people vote as we can.
Yeah, excellent. So open debates, good for democracy, right? Public financing, good for democracy. These are things that we're talking about that are integral to the strategy of our campaign specifically, but they are good for the health of the democracy of our state and beyond our state, because others will be looking to Maryland to see what we're doing here and how this campaign is playing out, not least because one of the candidates in the general election potentially has his eye on higher office. So we understand why debates are important. Let's talk about the how, the strategy behind this, right? There are a couple different paths. And maybe, if we talk again about this in a couple of weeks, we'll be able to share a little bit more, not to tease you all at home too much. But we've got a few things cooking right now. So we're just going to talk in general terms, putting aside the kind of Margaret Flowers, like just running up on the debate and, you know, getting dragged off by security, which we love. And, you know, people still to this day say like, that was badass. Like, why don't you guys do that? And it's like, oh, okay, well, you know, Andy and I aren't like weightlifters, you know. We have, maybe, you know, maybe if we have no other option, we'll do that. But we also have a plan A and a plan B. So like the Margaret Flowers run up on the stage, plan C, it's still in the realm of possibility, but it's a fallback after plan A and plan B. So what are the other paths, besides the executives of Maryland Public Television and some of these other debate hosts wake up one morning and say, you know what, it'd be good for democracy if I invited Andy and Owen and the other candidates from the non-principal parties to participate in the debates? What are the other pathways to getting on that stage?
Yeah, so up on the screen right now, it's a petition that we have up on our website. It is a petition to get the debates open. It is simple enough. It is an opportunity for Maryland voters to tell Maryland Public Television, again, a taxpayer-funded entity that gets 1/3 of its funding from the state of Maryland's tax base, to open up the debates and allow every candidate who is on the general election ballot, which has only ever been like 5 or 6 at most. We're not talking about hundreds of people on the general election ballot. We're talking about 3, 4, 5. So the petition would tell Maryland Public Television to open up the debates and allow the Green Party, the Libertarian Party, the Working Class Party, whoever's on the general election ballot, in order to be able to participate in the debate. That's one thing. And we're collecting signatures on it. We're going to keep collecting signatures on it. This was an idea the Libertarians and Greens and Working Class Party candidates had in 2022, and we picked it up and started our campaign right away doing that. The second thing is we are organizing MPT members. So if you are watching this and you are a member of Maryland Public Television, where they get the rest of their funding from, or where they get another large chunk of their funding from, is membership subscriptions. We are asking members to write Maryland Public Television and say that you want all the candidates to be on the debate stage. There's language on our petition there that you can use in order to craft that letter. And we think it's important for members to be able to tell them to tell the station what they have to do. Look, they lost 12% of their funding when the federal government cut the funding. So this is an important year to be able to put pressure on them if you are a member of MPT. If you are a member of MPT and you're a taxpayer of Maryland and you want to see the station that you pay for include all the candidates that are on your ballot so that you get to hear those things, it's pretty easy. Go sign the petition. Go sign the letter. I think there's some other strategies that we can use. We'll get into those a little bit later. But I will just say this: the legislature controls the funding for Maryland Public Television. And so when they have a budget hearing in Annapolis, we need to be there with people and members making the case. And if we, and there's some other legislative things that could happen. We'll see what happens with that. The session starts in, I don't know, probably 60, 70 days at this point. A lot can happen between now and then. But pressure, making, and we are able to bring the pressure to bear by telling the story in as many spaces as possible, telling our allies about it, telling our friends about it, telling organizations that support us. And it's also a thing that we can tell people who are like, we can't endorse you because we're a union that represents X thousand number of people, and our members might get hurt if we endorse you. We can say, fine, support this debate bill. So I think there's a lot of, if there's a bill that comes about, or sign this petition or whatever it is, we can get them involved in this struggle. We need to use every lever that we have in order to put pressure on Maryland Public Television to change the rules that they have right now, and to do what they need to do for the people of Maryland, which is allow every candidate who is on the ballot to have their voice be heard by every Marylander.
Mm-hmm. And I just want to thread this back to the goal of public financing. If you are contributing to this campaign and we can hire staff or send out mailers to folks who are Maryland Public Television members, right? organizing is what's going to get one way or another, whether it's inside advocacy or it's outside organizing. That is the pathway to the debates, right? It is not a closed door meeting in which we say pretty please or we exert some kind of personal leverage that we happen to have, or financial leverage that we as individual candidates have or our political party has. That's not it. It's organizing, both applying, the threat of members withdrawing their dues, right? I mean, members saying, hey, if you aren't doing what's right for our democracy here in Maryland, why am I contributing to your continued existence, right? That's the ultimate threat that is going to get anyone to pay attention, is the threat of boycott or divestment from their institution.
Yeah, and maybe we can sanction them too. We'll figure out how to do that. But look, at the end of the day, this is not against public television. We like public television. We are Greens. Look at us. We probably watch and consume more public television than most folks. We think that public television could benefit from expanding the scope of democracy and being a model of what good debate looks like, and allowing people to hear all the voices. When the corporations that are controlled by both of those parties control the rest of the debates, we don't expect them to be good media citizens. But we do expect public television to live up to its mission and to be a good democratic citizen and to help Marylanders make informed choices. And so I want to be very clear that this is not a critique of public television. It is asking public television to fulfill its mission and to do better at its job. And this is especially important at a time when Republicans in DC are threatening the funding of public television in a way that we've never seen before, because they believe that it is too partisan. We need to invite public television to expand its lens and view of what democracy is, and to make sure that the Marylanders who rely on that as their source for information have a means of hearing the voice of every candidate that is on the stage. So we are frustrated with public television, but we believe in its mission, and we believe that having it host valuable political debates is part of building a better and stronger democracy.
Yeah, I think that's a really helpful reframe. This is not an antagonistic organizing campaign, although there is, a material threat, but this is about the common good, right? It would be good for their ratings if they invited us on the debate stage and you're mixing it up with Wes Moore and the other candidates, and I'm mixing it up with Aruna Miller and the other candidates. It would be more interesting, and it would be better television, right?
And it'd be better for their membership. They're going to get more members if people who are independents, who are third party, people who are frustrated, people who think Maryland is on the wrong track, like the banner or like the poll that came out today said, if those people see themselves in the debate, not only are they going to be more likely to vote, but they're also going to be more likely to give MPT money, which it needs to survive in a world where Republicans are defunding everything that's public.
Right. Right. So it's good for Maryland public television. It's good for democracy. It's good for Marylanders. I also think it is potentially good for the other candidates to have their positions critiqued from multiple sides instead of just the same old zero-sum entrenched positions, boring, boiled over debates and candidate positions. Having a multi-party debate where you have to fend off critiques of your positions from multiple sides is much better training for a candidate who maybe has their eyes set on the White House or a congressional seat in Western Maryland, right? Like, if you want to become a better debater, debate with more sparring partners, right? And so I think this is, they can handle it, right? Some of the folks, some of the legislators, other folks we've been talking to are like, yeah, Wes can handle a couple more people on the debate stage, right? This is not a totally subversive thing. This is good for everyone to have more voices, have our civics be more fully fulfilled and rounded out, and have more perspectives represented on the stage. This isn't like a green partisan who put us on the stage for our own benefit. This is really a common good organizing campaign that we're engaged with here.
And it is a thing that I think you made this point at the beginning. It's a thing that has happened in the past, and it worked well. People remember Ross Perot and that debate way more than they remember Bill Clinton or who was it that time? Dole? I don't remember. No, which one was that one?
Bush, I think it was Bush 1, right?
Bush one, yeah. But I mean, like I'm saying, I remember Ross Perot. I don't remember who the other folks were, and I think there's a lot of people who see themselves in that, and a lot of people who would watch a debate that MPT put on that had us on the stage, as well as the Libertarians and the Working Class Party and the Democrats and the Republicans. And the last thing I'll say about this is sometimes they will say, well, we only want candidates who can win on the stage. And in 2022, when they refused to put the Green and the Libertarian and the Working Class Party on, they put Dan Cox on the stage. And Dan Cox is like the biggest loser to run for governor in Maryland in my lifetime. Dan Cox lost to Wes Moore so badly that the Libertarian was closer to Dan Cox than Dan Cox was to Wes Moore, right? Like, if you're going to put a loser like Dan Cox on the stage, then you should let everybody on the stage, because it's going to be more interesting than hearing that loser get his ass kicked by Wes Moore.
So yeah, redefining winning, redefining losing, and having more people on the debate stage. So great. So these are a couple of our big goals here: public campaign financing and participation in the debates, especially the debates that are subsidized by Maryland taxpayers. Right. So let's move on to another one of our goals. And actually, when you and I started working together on this campaign earlier this year, this wasn't necessarily one of the points that we were talking about. And as the campaign evolved more, we realized, hey, this is actually not something we should take for granted. This is something we should embrace and we should organize around. And that's winning the Maryland Green Party primary. So for folks who have never participated in a kind of DIY potluck primary, because the state of Maryland, by the way, going back to our theme of a broken democratic system, only funds and only manages the primaries of the two corporate funded parties, the Democrats and the Republicans. There are other parties that they recognize as having having secured a ballot line and done what they need to do to exist as a political party, but they don't have their primaries funded by the State Board of Elections. So if you've never participated in a Maryland Green Party primary, which is probably, a decent number of the folks watching or listening, can you set the stage a little bit for us, Andy? What's it like, and who participates and how is it run, that sort of thing?
So small parties in Maryland have a lot of latitude about how they nominate their candidates. They can do it by convention, they can do it by straw poll, they can do it however they want. The Maryland Green Party for the last several years has had a primary. We allow every registered Green that is eligible in the state to vote in the governor's race. And even if we don't, and we use ranked choice voting for that, and for the multi-member seats, we use proportional representation. We use the kind of voting methods that we want to see other people using. And so in 2026, every eligible Green in the state of Maryland who is registered at the time of our primary with the Green Party will be eligible to participate in our primary. It is a party-run primary. We use a piece of software called OPA Vote, which is an open, it's a piece of voting software to help people to run elections. And, it's a 3-week voting period. That might get changed at some point. We've found 3 weeks is a little long for that. But everybody gets to vote, and the people who get the most votes, however we tabulate the votes, will win. Now, one important thing I want to say here is even if we don't have opponents in that race, Greens believe that there should be a none of the above option on the ballot. So if you are looking at your ballot for something else, you're looking at like so many of the districts in the state, you're looking at your state delegate ballot, and there is one person there. There's not a challenger. There's nothing like that. Right now, your choice is to be able to vote for that one person or not vote for that one person. We believe that there should always be 2 choices on the ballot, and that they should always include that person and none of the above. We had a candidate lose to none of the above in the past because they didn't organize a strong primary campaign. And I think it's a good way for folks who don't like the candidates that are there to have something to organize for. Because in a traditional system, and the system run by the Democrats and the Republicans, if you don't have opposition and you vote for yourself, you win, right? and it's like, well, this is a ridiculous system, and so, yeah, we have a primary. People get to vote in it, and even if we don't have an opponent, they get to vote for none of the above. If they're like, y'all, this ain't it, I don't like y'all, or I don't want anybody for that position. And sometimes Greens decide they don't want somebody for that position. One of the things that none of the above allows is if you're like, no, this race is too close and too important, and I don't want us to risk being a spoiler, you can vote in that election, and you can vote none of the above.
So that's sort of the numerical and process reason why this is a goal for us, right? We don't want to lose to another candidate who may or may not emerge. We don't want to lose to none of the above. That would be not a good look after investing so much in this campaign and having so many people join us in this work. But I think there's also a strategic and organizing reason why winning this campaign and winning it in a big, decisive way is a top line goal, equal to, in some ways, qualifying for public financing and participating in the public debate. So can you talk about kind of the strategic and organizing goal of winning the Maryland Green Party primary this summer?
Yeah. Totally. So I think I mentioned this earlier, but there's some really interesting political science that looks at the way that third party votes are most effectively won, and the way that third parties can most effectively overperform the polling and the expectations. And that is engaged members of the third party who are actively participating in the process of spreading the word about the campaign. And I think in a lot of times in the past, when we've had small primaries, or the primary has been seen as an afterthought or a burden for candidates even, it is because they have not been thinking about this part of the goal. But I believe if we can get 300, 500 people committed enough to vote for us over none of the above or another candidate, I think we have a core group of people coming out of July, going into the really important election season, hopefully spread across the state, that can be our key spreaders, that can be the ones who are out there telling their friends, their families, their unions, the people they meet at the library, the people they meet at the bar, the people they talk to on street corners about our campaign, the need to invest their vote in something different, and the reason the two-party system is not working for folks. I think most people know the two-party system is not working for them, but they don't have anybody there explaining to them what the alternative is. When you and I do that work, we find ourselves, we get converts. People are like, hell yeah, that makes total sense. I understand what you all are doing and why to do it. If we activate that group of folks who vote for us in the primary, that group of folks becomes those, prime spreaders of the word that help us to go all over the state in the fall of 2026 and to get the kind of votes we need to really surprise the status quo and show people that Maryland is ready to embrace something different than what the two parties have on offer, and ready to build and construct a multi-party democracy that works for everybody.
Yeah, exactly. And I would just point out that, the bosses in Annapolis have gerrymandered so many, not just the congressional districts, but the state legislative districts, to make them less competitive, right? So if you are out there and you're a Maryland voter and you're not seeing a competitive race, either in the primary or in the general, there's a reason for that. And the big money in politics is one of the reasons why certain candidates get picked as the favorites in the primaries, right? There's this friendly incumbent process that many institutional organizations use to kind of pick the winner beforehand, or prop up an incumbent. So if you're out there, you have a real choice of, do you want to vote in one of the primaries of one of the corporate funded parties, or do you want to vote in the Maryland Green Party? And so this podcast episode is all about organizing, right? So, go to GoGreen2026.com / donate and help us reach our goal for fundraising. Same address, but /debate, help us reach our goal for inclusion in the debates. And you can, if you're a Maryland voter, you can go to the MVA website and change your registration to green if you're not already registered green, and make a plan to vote in our primary and be part of this movement building.
Yeah, I want to I want to tack two things onto that. But yes, register green. We'd love to have you over here. It's how we build the kind of coalition that we need in order to not only win our primary, not only qualify for public financing, not only get on the debate stage, but make the kind of transformative impact we want. But before we move to the next topic, I want to tell this little story about these competitive districts that you mentioned. I was talking to this guy who, progressive Democrat, and he is like, I don't understand why my state senator never replies to me. I write to him about the environment. I write to him about racial justice. I write to him about healthcare, and he never replies to me. And I said to the guy, I was like, your state senator was appointed. He won the Central Committee election in like 2014. Then he was appointed to fill a vacancy in the General Assembly, and then he had no primary challenger in 2018, and he had no general election challenger in 2018. In 2020, sometime in between there, he was appointed by the Central Committee to fill a Senate seat, and then when he ran for the Senate, he had no challenger in the Senate in the primary, and no challenger in the general election. And that means that he's not accountable to you. He is accountable to people other than the people who vote for him, because he doesn't need votes in order to have his job. He's got his job because he got appointed to it. And he's not being held accountable by voters because there's no competition. So the reason that they gerrymander these districts so that there is no competition, and the reason they keep competition tamped down, is because when there is competition, it makes lawmakers accountable to voters, and they don't want to be accountable to you. They want to be accountable to their donors, their national narratives, and their party leaders. And so when you look at your ballot and you see that there is nobody running in the primary against the people who are already there, or nobody running in the general against the people who are already there, it is not by accident. It is not by lack of trying. Instead, it is the opposite. It is a political system that is entrenching its own power and trying to make sure you have none. Our argument is that you need to use your power in order to make them accountable to you, not the other way around.
Absolutely. And that in a nutshell is the answer also to the question of why aren't you guys running as Democrats? You could be raising some of these same points in the Democratic primary. And it's like there is a hollowing out of our democracy that's happening. And in Maryland, it's not the Republicans who are doing it, right? It is the Democrats who have drawn these lines to divide communities, to decrease debate, to decrease competition of ideas, and to make elected officials accountable to lobbyists and the donor class, and not to you and me and the folks watching. So I think that is a really important point when we talk about the importance of building an alternative party and participating in that alternative party's primary system, in which we're using the democratic reforms that we want to see adopted by the state, right? We're using ranked choice voting. We're using proportional representation and voting. We're using a none of the above option. You want to throw the bums out? Well, okay, you need a none of the above option when in the general election too. So
maybe we should reframe it to throw the bums out instead of none of the above.
Yeah. I mean, we support housing for all. Housing is a human right, and you're not entitled to a job for life if you win an election, right? So let's transition a little bit from that goal of winning the Maryland Green Party primary this summer to what in a traditional campaign is the end all be all, the win number or the win percentage, right? In traditional kind of, I don't want to say corporate, but in professional campaign lore and practice, the win number is the start and end, and everything kind of orbits around the sun of the win number and the candidate who's capable of getting that win number. So what's our win number?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I will start this by saying for the longest time, I did not have one because I was still in that redefining losing mindset. And I was like, we're not going to win. We're not going to be the next governor. And I think I would sit at a table at a fair or festival and somebody would say, are you going to, you're not going to win, right? And I would say, look, I don't think that my wife, my cats, my chickens, and I are going to pack up and move to Annapolis in January of 2027, but, we're trying, or something like that. And that fell a little bit flat, even though it was getting at an idea that I think is really important, this redefining winning idea. let's be real. The best performance for since the Civil War, the best performance for an independent candidate in the state of Maryland is 9%. Hyman Pressman, we talked about that race earlier. The best performance for a third-party candidate is 3.2%, 1895, Prohibition candidate. The best performance in the modern era is like 1.5, something like that percent. And so we're not talking, even if we look at the history of third-party campaigns in the state of Maryland, we understand that it is not likely that we are going to win. But until we had a win number, and I'll get to it in a second, but until we had a win number, we were still stuck in that redefining or in that reframing losing mindset. And I had a lot of conversations with people who were in that political space that you're talking about, the political space that is like, you got to have a win number. And I refused for the longest time. But then at some point, but I had always been saying, we're going to run the best campaign since the Civil War, and we're going to show Maryland that it is time to rebuild something different. Well, I actually went and did the work on that. And so the win number for me is 100,000 votes. 100,000 votes is about 4%. It's not going to be better than Hyman Pressman's percentage, but it's going to be better than his vote total. So if we had 4% and 100,000 votes, we would have the strongest third-party campaign since the Civil War in the state of Maryland. We'd have the most votes outside of the two-party system ever. And I think that is going to start to send that signal that people in Maryland are tired of this. They are tired of the way that the two-party system works. They are tired of paying taxes at a high rate and getting services at a rate that feels frustrating and annoying. I think people in Maryland are willing to pay taxes. They live in Maryland. We have high taxes, but they want a government that works for them. And when they're in trouble, they want it to help them out. They don't want to be used as pawns in some political game that Annapolis Democrats or DC Republicans are playing. And they want to make sure that the hard-earned money that they're putting into the government and into the system that we have is working for them, and it is not right now. And if we get 100,000 votes, we send a very strong signal that if the two parties don't change the way they're working, they're going to lose control of power, and new people are going to come on the stage, new people are going to demand new answers, and new people are going to throw those bums out.
Yeah. And I just want to contextualize, if you're watching, Andy keeps referring to the Civil War, and it's not because it's kind of a convenient midpoint or, party politics before the Civil War are so different. The Civil War, the 1850s, was the last time that a third party, a new party, kind of broke through and became one of the main parties, right? The Republican Party, building on some other abolitionist parties that emerged before it, after the Whig Party collapsed, because in part it could not offer a nationwide vision of post-slavery America, right? This is the last time that a third party became a main party, and that's the Republican Party. And so that when we refer back to the Civil War, that's in part why. And
yeah,
so,
and I think the other important part of that is the current Maryland Constitution was adopted in 1867, and it was adopted as a response to the 1864 Constitution. I don't want to go too far down this rabbit hole. This can be its own episode, but the 1864 Constitution emancipated people who were enslaved. It was a reconstruction. It was a reconstruction state constitution that took power away from the Confederates, the Democrats, the slaveholders, and the landowners, and it shifted the balance of power in significant ways. In 1867, Democrats, so upset about this self-run reconstruction in the state of Maryland, passed the 1867 Constitution, which is the current Constitution of Maryland, as a response to an 1864 Constitution, which was designed to be a Reconstruction Constitution and designed to be emancipatory. So when we talk about the Civil War, not only are we talking about it as the last time that a major realignment of the parties occurred, but we are talking about it as the nexus and the generation point for where our current state constitution comes in. Since 1867, Democrats have held both houses of the General Assembly almost every session and have had a veto-proof majority for decades. Maryland is one of the only states in the country where Democrats were in power in 1867 and our Empower in 2026. We are a border state, and we're probably the only state where it is possible that that type of thing could occur. And so when we use that reference point, it's because of those two historical things that help to understand how we got to the two-party system we have right now, but also explain the Maryland Constitution that we have today.
Yeah, really interesting stuff. Yeah, we should do a Maryland history episode and invite some friends on and just nerd out about that, or do a constitutional episode and just nerd out about that for a while. But let's get back to this goal. We're talking about a goal of 4%, 100,000, and it'll be very difficult for us to measure by tradition. Again, we've talked about win number as the sun in which all campaign plans orbit around, but polls are the stars that help campaigns navigate how well they're doing in getting to where they're going, right? And we just can't use polls, except for if we qualify for public financing. We probably can't afford internal polls, and external polls, if we organize and get ourselves included in them, or if they include us by default, that's great. But sometimes we'll be in the margin of error. Putting that aside, we just got our first poll, and that's kind of exciting. So let's talk about that poll a little bit. We had it in our newsletter, Theory of Change. You can subscribe to that as well on our website. But talk about this poll. What are the takeaways, Andy?
Yeah, so this poll was from the Anne Arundel County Community College, Political Science Department, I think. And what it did was it was a survey of Anne Arundel County voters. And Anne Arundel County, for those that don't know, is the place where Annapolis is. It's kind of a purple county, but maybe leans purple but is blue. It's Maryland, so there's not a ton of blue counties, and there's not a ton of contested counties, but I think Anne Arundel County is one of those counties. So this poll had Larry Hogan, former Governor Larry Hogan, who wants to be president, current Governor Wes Moore, who went on The View to say he doesn't want to be president. So I guess, if you go on The View to say you don't want to be president, it's clear that you don't want to be president. Anyway, it had those two guys, and it offered a Green Party candidate. We got 2% in that poll, 2% of Democrats, 2% of lean Democrats, and 4% of independents. That's pretty good for us, I think. It's the first time we've been included in that poll at all. So people who take that poll and see that poll aren't used to seeing us. And I think it says a couple of things. One, I think our campaign is going to exceed the expectations that people have for a Green Party campaign typically. So I think that it is pretty likely that our generic Green polling in that campaign, we're going to do better than that, right? Mm-hmm. The second thing is the race where we are least or most likely to be ignored by frustrated Democrats and frustrated left or liberal-leaning or left-leaning independents is a race where Larry Hogan is squaring off against Wes Moore. Larry Hogan is the only Republican who has shown the ability to win in the state of Maryland in the last decade at a large level. And if he were to come back, he would create a close race that I think a lot of people would be talking about spoiler effects in. And so those two takeaways, I think, are a positive sign that the environment is good for a Green Party campaign to do well. And I think, as I said, we are going to outperform the traditional generic Green Party campaign. So when those voters in Anne Arundel County who hear our plans for expanding housing, for capping the rent, for stopping the destruction of the Bay, for making sure that they have access to the goods and services that they need, that we can control prices, that we can control electricity prices, when the other candidates are busy fighting each other about how they position themselves for their future plans, I think we're going to do really well beyond that 2%. And so I think that we will start to be included in more polls. I think that I hope that the next UMBC poll includes a green option. And then once we win the primary, we know that we'll be included in that poll. And I think we'll start to get included in other polls. I think the more money we get too, and the more press coverage we get, the more likely we are to be included in these polls and more likely to do well in these polls. One thing I want to say about this One last thing I want to say about this. Greens typically overperform their voter registration, but underperform the polls because people in September or August or something like that are thinking about the green alternative. And as you get closer, they're not getting contacted by the campaign, so they're either likely to not vote or they're likely to make a lesser evil vote at that point. And so I think if we are strategic and implement the things that we've talked about, the on the ground, grassroots, person to person, peer to peer organizing that comes through the process of winning our primary, the contact with people, the regular making a podcast, the regular newsletter, all that stuff, I think that we can overperform the polls and we can surprise people. Remember, I think we've said this a couple of times. Greens overperform the polls when they have a core group of people who have been organized and are willing to organize.
Yeah. Thanks so much for reading those tea leaves, Andy. Before we move to the last goal, which is a more overarching goal and a less specific one, I did just want to give the propers for that poll. So it's from the Center for the Study of Local Issues. And you're correct that the pollster, Professor Dan Nataf, is in the political science department at Anne Arundel Community College. So you can check out his work. He's been doing this for a long time, and he has a really innovative method and asks really important questions that get at the root of, the issues facing folks in Anne Arundel County related to the high price of housing, the lack of public transportation, and so on. So let's move to our final topic. We've gone through several really important and specific measurable goals: qualifying for public financing, participation in the debates, winning the primary, and then redefining 4%, 100,000 votes as a win for a movement-based campaign. Let's talk about beyond the life of this campaign or during the life of this campaign. How is this campaign about more than asking for and being given power by voters, by people in the state? And how is this campaign more about creating movement structures across the state that can build power for themselves?
Yeah, that's a great question. So a moment ago, I said the goal is 100,000 votes, 4%. That's the big goal. That's the top level goal. The job that has to be done in order for this to be an effective movement building campaign is for us to get 1%. That's about 25,000 votes. And if we get that 25,000 votes, the Green Party maintains its ballot line going into 2028 when we have Baltimore City elections. One of the most effective campaigns we've ever ran, a campaign you and I worked on, was Franca Mueller-Paz's campaign in 2020. Franca got 35% running an exciting and uplifting campaign during the COVID state of emergency and during all of the despair that we were going through as a country in 2020. She gave hope to people at a time when there was no hope. She gave excitement to people who had checked out of politics. And that was a Baltimore City Council race. So if we get 1% in this race, that means that January of 2025, people who want to follow in Franca's footsteps and run for Baltimore City Council on a green vision and a green agenda can go to the State Board of Elections or the local Board of Elections, file for office. They can participate in a public financing program, and they can follow in the tracks that we are doing. I don't know if
I could just break in there, Andy. Hope is great, and I'm all for hope, but there were other outcomes with that campaign, right? The winner of that campaign improved his constituent services and introduced a reparations bill in order to prove his progressive bona fides, because he had just been challenged across East Baltimore on both his commitment to social justice and his commitment to taking care of the residents of his councilmanic district, right?
Yes, and then he lost in the primary in 2024 to a progressive labor candidate. So when we talk about redefining winning, I think we can look at it and say a race like Franca's race had real material impacts on the outcome of people in that district and across the city. I think it's probably true that Franca also helped get the city to negotiate something that allowed young people to have better access access to Wi-Fi. Now, is what they negotiated what we would have done? No, but without Franca in that race, it is very unlikely that the mayor would have made a deal with Comcast that allowed more young people to have access to the internet during a time when they were stuck at home from school. So green campaigns can have material impacts outside of winning and holding power. I think that's a really good point here. And I think that the role that Franca's campaign played in making sure that Robert Stokes, A, became more progressive, and B, eventually lost his seat to a person more progressive than him, is undoubtable. It is absolutely the case. And so if we get 1% in this race, we set up for a really exciting Baltimore City election in 2026 or in 2028. Beyond that, I think we show people what can be done here. I will often say to people, I'm not the perfect candidate. I don't think you're the perfect candidate. I think that we are people who know how to do this and are excited to do it and have the will and the skill and the goal and the role identified, and we're putting the work in. But I think we can open the door for other folks, whether they are Greens, whether they're Ujima People's Progress Party, whether they're Working Class Party, Libertarians, or some yet to be named party that is going to funnel the anger that has come against the two-party system into a constructive alternative that begins to move Maryland toward a more just, more democratic, more ecologically wise, and more peaceful state. And I think that in addition to the aspirational parts of it, there's some real material aspects that come out of it too. Those 500 people that we get that are going to be our core Greens who are helping win the primary, they're going to help us build the bench in the future. The people that we hire in this campaign are going to have the kind of campaign skills that they can use to help those people who are the new bench, or who are the bench who's going to move up and run in the future, to have good campaign staff. They're going to be local organizers. They're going to run ballot initiatives. They're going to help build the Green Party. They're going to help build alternative parties. They're going to push for debate inclusion. And we're going to be able to take those lists of people that we have from gathering the public financing and help support people in each of the 6 counties across the state that have public financing and want to run and challenge the system. I don't believe that we're going to become the next governor and lieutenant governor. And I'm not shy to say that. We said that to the Baltimore Banner. We said that to the Talbot Spy, and we say that almost everywhere. But I do believe the work that we're doing right now is going to construct the institution and the idea that allows people in the future to win from outside of the two-party system and show Maryland as a leader in the kind of democracy we need if we want to get out of the polarization, oligarchy, death, and destruction that the two parties have us in right now. So I think there's some real tangible things, lists of people who will donate, people with the capacity to run campaigns, excited organizers with a vision and a strategy, ballot access for Baltimore City races in 2028 and for other races in 2028. And I also think there's some more abstract things which are showing people a vision of a world that can be different by doing the different thing right here and right now, and making sure that we leave something better at the end of this race than the way that we found it when we started this race.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is, you asked me about why I decided to run, and this is why I'm here, right? This is the movement building. And I expressed my fondness for future focus, but I think if you've been following with these goals, we are building this movement during the campaign. This is not something that we hit 4% or we hit 1% and poof, these things happen. We are building a more robust, healthier multi-party democracy by participating in public financing, by opening the debates to all candidates, by shining a light and collaborating with local residents and organizers in Frederick County who don't want a big stadium in their neighborhood, right? By collaborating with folks in Allegheny County where the price of water is too damn high, right? These are the type of issues that will get forgotten and swept under the rug because the people in power are taking checks from those who profit from the status quo. So during this campaign, we have an opportunity, in part because we're not aiming for 51% and trying to be moderately acceptable to a small majority of people, because we're able to take radical positions and expand the conversation and shed light on issues that folks in power would rather not have the light shown on. these are some of the things we can build movement during the campaign, and we can also set a foundation for future movement building.
Yeah, I want to say two things, and then I appreciate folks who have been listening this whole time. I want to leave with these two things, and then we will get toward closing out. The first thing is the Maryland Green Party has been on the ballot for 25 years, and that is an amazing feat for small parties in the United States. Typically, what happens is a party bubbles up for a couple of years, a couple of cycles, and all of this stuff that we're talking about is really hard to do and really hard to explain to people. So then it dissipates and it goes away, and then some new party bubbles up. But the Green Party has been on the ballot in Maryland for 25 years, which is a really worthwhile feat. And I think for much of that 25 years, certainly the last part of that 25 years, we have gotten so focused on staying around so that people have additional choices that we haven't been able to invest the time and energy in using those choices to change the outcomes. I think over the course of the next 25 years, if we are successful, we will be able to use the work that we are doing here to change the outcomes for people who are living in Maryland right now and dealing with prices that are too high, with politicians that are not responsive, with a climate and an environment that is becoming more threatening, and with an economy that is not designed to work for the future. And so first 25 years, we did an amazing work, and people have lived and died in pursuing that, and we need to honor that work. The next 25 years, we need to shift the focus and start being about changing outcomes so that Marylanders have a better life and a better opportunity than they have had before. So I think that's one really important thing to say here. I think the other really important thing to say here is that it may not be the Green Party at the end of that 25 years that is the one that is doing this transformative work, but we are here right now. And what we talked about at your launch party, what I talked about at your launch party was this quote from Femi Tewu, who wrote a book called Reconsidering Reparations. And what he argues in this is that each of us need to do the work that we can in order to build the kind of institutions that allow the world to be changed by people who come after us. And I think that we are very much doing that work right now. And I think that this is that kind of project. It is that kind of generational work that may not get us the result that we want, but helps to move the ball closer to the goal line that we need to get to. Generations and generations of people in the best struggles in the world have fought and died before they see the outcomes of their struggle. And I hope that we see the outcome of our struggle. But I know that if we do this work to build this alternative, to build this movement, to build this grassroots vision of a future that works for everybody, we can be in a place where we leave that gift to the people who come after us, and we are happy and proud with the work that we've done, even if we don't see all of the results. Building a new world against the 500 years of racist global capitalist domination is going to take time. And we're doing that work, and this campaign is part of that work. And I want folks to understand that it doesn't stop a year from today. I mean, we're going to stop a year from today and take a little bit of rest because it's going to be a long time. But the work doesn't stop after that. The work continues. This is about building a constructive alternative to a terrible world that we see around us so that people who come after us have an alternative to do something better.
Yeah, well said. Yeah, very moving and a good way to close out our podcast. Thank you, for staying with us this long. Again, growing pains as co-host here, letting Andy talk for a long time when he has a lot of things to say and ask a lot of open-ended questions. So, some room for improvement. But thank you again for staying with us. This has been really fun to kind of do a role reversal, and looking forward to the next opportunity. Have a good night, everyone, or a good morning if you're listening tomorrow.
Yeah, thank you all so much. And thank you, Owen. This was so fun. I'm really excited that we do this. And, we can hash out whether we want to do 2-hour-long podcasts in the future. But I think the live stream is going to be an opportunity for quicker, shorter, less wide-ranging conversations. So we really encourage you to subscribe to that. It's going to be starting very soon. And, subscribe to our YouTube channel so that you can get the notices on that. One of the things I love about this is we can do long form, we can do short form, we can do all of we can do all of it. And we can speak to any audience who is willing to listen, because I think the message we have is important and I want to make sure that people hear it. So thank you, Owen. Thank you all for listening. It's really good to be back in the saddle of doing this podcast again. And I think we're going to have a great time.
Yeah. All right. Bye, everyone.
All right. Bye-bye.